The morning sun painted the Texas highway in golden stripes as Sarah Chen pressed harder on the gas pedal. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, her knuckles had turned white. In the back seat, her 8-year-old son Tommy lay unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. Every few seconds, she glanced in the rearview mirror, watching his small chest rise and fall with frightening difficulty. "Come on. Come on," she whispered, her voice breaking. The nearest hospital was still 40 miles away, and Tommy's condition was getting worse by the minute. It had started as a normal Saturday morning. Tommy had been playing in their backyard when he suddenly collapsed, gasping for air. Sarah had immediately recognized the signs. A severe allergic reaction. But this time was different. The EpiPen she always kept ready had malfunctioned, the needle jamming at the crucial moment. By the time she realized what had happened, Tommy was already losing consciousness. The rural road stretched endlessly ahead, with nothing but empty fields and scattered farmhouses on either side. Sarah had called 911, but the ambulance was coming from the county seat, at least 30 minutes away. The dispatcher had told her to wait, but Sarah couldn't just stand there watching her son struggle to breathe. She had to try to get him to the hospital herself. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Dr. Martinez from the emergency room was calling back. "Sarah, where are you now?" His voice came through the car speakers. "Still on Route 47, about 15 miles past Miller's Crossing," she replied, her voice shaking. "Doctor, he's getting worse. His lips are turning blue, and he's barely breathing. Listen carefully. You need to keep talking to him, even if he seems unconscious. And watch his pulse. Check his wrist every few minutes. If you can't find a pulse, you'll need to pull over immediately and start CPR." Sarah's heart sank. She had taken CPR classes years ago, but the thought of having to perform it on her own child terrified her. "How much longer until the ambulance reaches us?" "They're about 20 minutes out from your last known location. Sarah, I need you to stay calm. Keep driving safely. But if his condition deteriorates further, you might need to flag down help." As if the universe was testing her resolve, Sarah noticed her car's temperature gauge creeping toward the red zone. Steam began rising from under the hood, visible through the windshield. Her aging sedan, which had been making strange noises for weeks, was finally giving up on her. "No, no, no," she cried out, hitting the steering wheel. The car shuddered and began to slow down despite her pressing the accelerator. The engine was overheating, and she could smell burning oil. Sarah managed to coast the dying vehicle to the shoulder of the road, just as the engine gave a final wheeze and shut down. She was stranded in the middle of nowhere with her unconscious child, no working vehicle, and help still 20 minutes away. She immediately turned to check on Tommy. His breathing had become even more labored, and his skin had a grayish tint that made her stomach drop. She grabbed his wrist, searching for a pulse with trembling fingers. It was there, but weak and rapid. "Tommy, baby. Mommy's here," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're going to be okay. Just keep breathing for Mommy." The empty road seemed to mock her desperation. In the distance, she could see nothing but rolling hills and fence lines. The nearest house she remembered passing was at least 5 miles back. Her phone showed 2 bars of signal, but calling 911 again wouldn't make the ambulance arrive any faster. Just as panic began to overwhelm her completely, Sarah heard the distant rumble of an engine. A vehicle was approaching from the direction she had come. She jumped out of the car and began waving her arms frantically, not caring who it might be. Anyone would be better than being stranded alone. The approaching vehicle was an old pickup truck, its blue paint faded and its bed loaded with hay bales. As it slowed down and pulled over behind her car, Sarah could see a man in worn jeans and a cowboy hat climbing out of the driver's seat. He looked to be in his 60s, with weathered hands and the kind of steady gait that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. "Ma'am, you having car trouble?" he called out as he approached, his voice carrying a thick Texas drawl. "Please, I need help," Sarah gasped, pointing toward her car. "My son is in there. He's having a severe allergic reaction, and my car broke down. The ambulance is coming, but he can't wait that long." The rancher's expression immediately shifted from casual concern to focused urgency. He strode quickly to the car and peered into the back seat where Tommy lay motionless. His experienced eyes took in the child's condition in seconds. "How long has he been like this?" he asked, his voice calm but serious. "About 20 minutes. His EpiPen didn't work, and he's getting worse." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. The rancher straightened up and looked at Sarah with surprising intensity. "Ma'am, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. Your boy needs medical attention right now, not in 20 minutes. My truck can get us to the hospital faster than waiting for that ambulance. But what if moving him makes it worse?" Sarah asked, her maternal instincts warring with desperation. The old cowboy placed a gentle but firm hand on her shoulder. "I've seen enough medical emergencies on my ranch to know when someone's running out of time. Trust me on this." Without waiting for her permission, he opened the back door of his truck and began clearing space in the cab. He worked with the efficiency of someone who had dealt with emergencies before, moving tools and equipment with quick, precise movements. "We need to get him lying flat with his head slightly elevated," he said, pulling out a thick horse blanket from behind the seat. "This will cushion him for the ride." Sarah watched in amazement as this rancher, who had appeared from nowhere, took charge of the situation with remarkable competence. There was something about his demeanor that inspired confidence, even in her panicked state. As they carefully lifted Tommy from the back seat of Sarah's car, the rancher spoke quietly but firmly. "I'm going to drive faster than I ever have before, and I know exactly which route will get us there quickest. But first, I need you to call that hospital and tell them we're coming in hot." Sarah realized she didn't even know this man's name, but somehow that didn't matter. What mattered was that someone with authority and purpose had taken control of a situation that was spiraling beyond her ability to handle. The rancher's truck roared to life with a sound that promised power and reliability, everything her car had lacked. As Sarah climbed into the passenger seat with Tommy cradled in her arms, she felt the first glimmer of hope she had experienced since this nightmare began. "Hold on tight," the rancher said, checking his mirrors and putting the truck in gear. "We're about to find out what this old truck can really do." As they pulled onto the highway, Sarah looked at the speedometer climbing past numbers that would normally terrify her. But instead of fear, she felt something unexpected. Trust in this weathered stranger, who had appeared exactly when she needed him most. The pickup truck flew down the highway at speeds that would have earned a normal driver a hefty ticket, but the rancher's hands remained steady on the wheel. Sarah clutched Tommy closer to her chest, feeling his weak heartbeat against her ribs. In the few minutes since they had started driving, his breathing had become even more shallow. "What's your name?" Sarah asked, suddenly realizing she was trusting her child's life to a complete stranger. "Frank Morrison," he replied, his eyes never leaving the road. "I've been ranching in this area for 43 years. I'm Sarah, and this is Tommy," she said, stroking her son's forehead. "Mr. Morrison, I can't thank you enough for stopping." Frank glanced at Tommy through the rearview mirror, his expression grave. "Ma'am, I need to tell you something. Your boy's condition is critical, and we might not make it to the hospital in time if his airways close completely." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I might need to do something that's going to seem strange to you." Frank reached into the glove compartment and pulled out what looked like a small medical kit. "I want you to know that I have experience with this kind of situation." "What kind of experience?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible over the engine's roar. Frank was quiet for a moment, navigating around a slower vehicle with precision that spoke of years behind the wheel. "Before I became a full-time rancher, I spent 12 years as a paramedic with the County Rescue Service. I've seen more allergic reactions than I care to count." Sarah stared at him in shock. This weathered cowboy, who looked like he'd spent his entire life working with cattle, had once been a medical professional. It seemed impossible, yet it explained his calm competence in the face of emergency. 12 years? She repeated. "Retired from medical service in 1995, Frank confirmed, taking a sharp turn onto a farm road that Sarah didn't recognize. "This route will cut 15 minutes off our time," he explained, "but that might still be too long for your boy." As if to confirm his words, Tommy's breathing became more labored, and a frightening wheezing sound emerged from his throat. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest again. His airways are starting to close, Frank observed, glancing back again. Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I have medical supplies in that kit that could save Tommy's life, but I need your permission to use them. What kind of supplies? Sarah asked, though part of her already knew she would agree to anything that might help her son. I carry an emergency tracheostomy kit, Frank said matter-of-factly. It's a last resort procedure, but if his throat closes completely, it might be the only thing that keeps him alive until we reach the hospital. Sarah's world seemed to tilt. A tracheostomy. She knew enough about medicine to understand that meant cutting into Tommy's throat to create an artificial airway. The thought of this stranger performing surgery on her child in the cab of a moving pickup truck was terrifying. Have you ever done one before? She whispered. 7 times during my service, Frank replied. 6 of them made it to the hospital alive. They're one. The brutal honesty of his words hit Sarah like a physical blow. One child hadn't made it. But looking at Tommy's increasingly gray complexion, she realized they might not have any other choice. Frank must have sensed her internal struggle because he continued talking. I know it sounds frightening, but I need you to understand something. Without intervention, your son has maybe 10 minutes before his airways close completely. With the tracheostomy, we buy him the time he needs to get proper medical care. Tommy's wheezing had become a high-pitched whistle that made Sarah's heart race. She had watched enough medical shows to know that sound meant his throat was swelling shut. Do it, she said suddenly, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Do whatever you have to do to save him. Frank nodded grimly and pulled over to the side of the farm road. I need you to help me. Can you follow instructions exactly as I give them? Yes, Sarah replied, though her hands were shaking. Frank opened his medical kit with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Inside were instruments that looked far too sophisticated for a rancher to be carrying around. Sterilized scalpels, tubing, gauze, and bottles of antiseptic. First, we need to position him properly, Frank instructed, his voice taking on the calm, authoritative tone she imagined he had used as a paramedic. Lay him flat on the seat, with his neck extended slightly. That's good. Sarah watched in amazement as Frank transformed before her eyes. The casual, slow-talking rancher disappeared, replaced by a focused medical professional whose movements were precise and confident. I'm going to clean the area first, he explained, swabbing Tommy's throat with antiseptic. The procedure itself will take about 2 minutes. I need you to hold his shoulders steady and be ready to hand me things when I ask for them. Tommy's breathing had become so labored that Sarah could see his chest muscles straining with each attempt to draw air. The wheezing sound was getting fainter, which Frank explained was actually worse. It meant less air was getting through. Ready? Frank asked, positioning the scalpel. Sarah nodded, though she felt like she might faint. She focused on Tommy's face, whispering words of comfort even though she didn't know if he could hear her. Frank worked with steady hands, making a small incision in Tommy's throat with surgical precision. Sarah had expected to feel sick watching the procedure, but instead found herself fascinated by Frank's obvious skill. This was clearly someone who had done this many times before and knew exactly what he was doing. Almost there, Frank murmured, inserting a small tube through the incision. This will give him a direct airway to his lungs. The moment the tube was in place, Tommy's chest began rising and falling more easily. The gray color in his skin started to improve, and Sarah could hear air moving freely through the tube. Oh my God, Sarah breathed, tears of relief streaming down her face. He's breathing better. Frank quickly secured the tube with medical tape, then checked Tommy's pulse at his wrist. Stronger and more regular, he confirmed. We bought ourselves some time. As Frank cleaned and packed away his instruments, Sarah stared at him with new eyes. This man who had appeared like an angel on the highway was clearly far more than he seemed. Why do you still carry medical equipment? She asked as Frank started the truck again and pulled back onto the road. Old habits, Frank replied with a slight smile. And living 40 miles from the nearest hospital means you never know when someone might need help. I've had to use this kit 3 times in the past 10 years. Twice for ranch hands who got hurt, and once for a family whose car flipped on the highway during an ice storm. Sarah looked down at Tommy, who was sleeping peacefully now that he could breathe properly. The tube in his throat looked frightening, but his color was good and his breathing was steady. "You saved his life," she said quietly. "We saved his life," Frank corrected. "You made the right decision to trust me." And that took courage. As they approached the outskirts of the county seat where the hospital was located, Sarah realized that this experience had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. She had learned something important about not judging people by their appearance, about the unexpected ways help could arrive, and about her own strength in a crisis. Frank reached for his radio. Sarah hadn't even noticed he had one, and called the hospital directly. "County General, this is Frank Morrison. I'm bringing in a pediatric patient with severe allergic reaction. I've performed an emergency tracheostomy, and the child is stable but will need immediate medical attention. ETA. 4 minutes. The voice that crackled back over the radio was immediately respectful and professional. "Copy that, Frank. We'll have the team ready. Good to hear your voice again." Sarah looked at Frank with curiosity. "They know you?" Frank's weathered face showed the hint of a smile. "I may have retired from active duty, but I still volunteer with the emergency services when they need extra hands. These folks have seen my handiwork before." The hospital's emergency entrance doors slid open as Frank carried Tommy inside, with Sarah running alongside them. The medical team was already waiting, led by Dr. Martinez, whom Sarah recognized from their phone conversation. The transfer from Frank's arms to the hospital gurney was smooth and professional. "Frank Morrison, Dr. Martinez said with obvious relief and respect. "I should have known you'd be involved when dispatch said someone had performed a field tracheostomy. How's the patient?" "Stable airway, good color, strong pulse," Frank reported in crisp medical terminology. "Allergic reaction started approximately 45 minutes ago. EpiPen malfunctioned. I performed the trach about 15 minutes ago when his airways began closing. Used a size 4 tube. Secured. And patent." Dr. Martinez nodded, examining the tube placement. "Textbook work, as always. We'll take good care of him from here." As the medical team wheeled Tommy toward the treatment rooms, Sarah felt suddenly lost. The adrenaline that had carried her through the crisis was wearing off, leaving her shaky and overwhelmed. Frank noticed her distress immediately. "He's in the best hands now," he said gently, guiding her toward the waiting room chairs. "Dr. Martinez is one of the finest emergency physicians in the state." Sarah sank into a chair, finally allowing herself to fully process what had just happened. "I still can't believe you were a paramedic. When I saw you get out of that truck, I thought you were just a kind rancher who might give us a ride to town." Frank chuckled, settling into the chair beside her. "Well, I am a rancher. Have been for over 20 years now. But some things you never forget, and saving lives is one of them." "Why did you leave medical service?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about this remarkable man who had appeared at exactly the right moment. Frank was quiet for a moment, looking out the window toward the parking lot, where his old truck sat among the modern cars. "Burnout. Mostly. 12 years of seeing people on the worst days of their lives takes its toll. I inherited my father's ranch when he passed, and it seemed like the right time for a change, but I never stopped learning. Never stopped keeping my skills current." A nurse approached them with a clipboard. "Mrs. Chen, I need to get some information for Tommy's chart." As Sarah provided the necessary details about Tommy's medical history and the day's events, she noticed that several hospital staff members stopped by to greet Frank warmly. It was clear he was well known and respected here. "Mr. Morrison volunteers with our emergency helicopter service," the nurse explained to Sarah. "When we have particularly difficult rescues in rural areas, Frank often guides the team to locations they might not find otherwise." After the nurse left, Sarah looked at Frank with new understanding. "You never really retired from saving people, did you?" "Different way of doing it now," Frank admitted. "But you're right. It's hard to walk away from something that's been such a big part of your life." Dr. Martinez emerged from the treatment area, still wearing his surgical gloves but smiling. "Good news. Tommy's responding well to treatment. We've given him additional medications to counteract the allergic reaction, and his breathing is much improved. We'll need to keep him overnight for observation, but he should make a complete recovery." Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. "Can I see him?" "Of course. He's awake and asking for you." As they walked toward Tommy's room, Dr. Martinez turned to Frank. "That was exceptional work out there, Frank. If you hadn't acted when you did, this could have had a very different outcome." Frank shrugged modestly. "Just happened to be in the right place at the right time." "It was more than that," Sarah interjected firmly. "You didn't just happen to be there. You made a choice to stop, to help, to use skills you could have kept to yourself." Tommy was indeed awake when they entered his room, though his voice was hoarse due to the tube that was still in place. "Mom, what happened? Why does my throat feel funny?" Sarah sat beside his bed and took his hand, explaining in simple terms about his allergic reaction and how Mr. Morrison had helped save his life. Tommy's eyes grew wide as he looked at Frank. "You're like a cowboy, doctor," Tommy said, his voice filled with the kind of wonder only an 8-year-old could muster. Frank laughed, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "I guess that's one way to put it. How are you feeling, partner?" "Better, but hungry," Tommy admitted, which made everyone in the room smile. "That's an excellent sign," Dr. Martinez said. "We'll get you some food once we remove the tube, which should be in a few hours." Over the next several hours, as Tommy recovered and the medical staff monitored his progress, Sarah found herself in long conversations with Frank. She learned that he lived alone on his ranch since his wife had passed away 5 years earlier, that he had 2 grown children who lived in other states, and that his volunteer work with emergency services had become increasingly important to him. "It gives me purpose," he explained simply. "The ranch keeps me busy, but helping people keeps me feeling useful." Sarah also learned that Frank had been driving to town that morning to pick up medication for one of his horses when he had spotted her broken-down car. If he had left an hour earlier or later, or taken a different route, he never would have found them. "Do you believe in fate?" Sarah asked as they watched Tommy doze in his hospital bed. Frank considered the question seriously. "I believe in being prepared to help when the opportunity presents itself. Whether you call that fate, divine intervention, or just good timing, doesn't matter much to the person who needs help." That evening, after Tommy had been cleared for discharge the next morning, Frank prepared to head home. Sarah walked him to the parking lot, struggling with how to adequately thank someone who had literally saved her child's life. "I don't know how to repay you," she said, tears threatening to return. "You don't need to repay anything," Frank replied. "Just promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll get Tommy's allergy tested more thoroughly. Find out exactly what triggered this reaction so you can avoid it in the future. And get him a new EpiPen, one that works." Sarah nodded vigorously. "Already scheduled. Dr. Martinez is referring us to a specialist." Frank climbed into his truck, then paused before closing the door. "There's something else. I want you to consider volunteering with the local emergency services. You kept your head in a crisis today. Made good decisions under pressure. We need people like you." Sarah was surprised by the suggestion. "I don't have any medical training." "Training can be taught," Frank said with a smile. "Character can't. You've got the right instincts for this kind of work." 3 months later, Sarah found herself completing her EMT certification course. Frank had been right about her aptitude for emergency medical work, and she discovered that helping others gave her the same sense of purpose that Frank had described. Tommy made a complete recovery and, thanks to extensive allergy testing, now carried 2 working EpiPens at all times. He also carried something else, a deep respect for the cowboy doctor who had saved his life. On the anniversary of that frightening day, Sarah and Tommy drove out to Frank's ranch for a visit that had become an annual tradition. Frank always prepared a special barbecue, and Tommy loved hearing stories about life on the ranch and Frank's adventures as a paramedic. "You know what I learned that day?" Sarah told Frank, as they sat on his porch watching Tommy play with Frank's border collie. "What's that?" "That heroes don't always look the way you expect them to. Sometimes they drive old pickup trucks and wear cowboy hats." Frank tipped his hat slightly. "And sometimes they're mothers, who make the hard decisions when their children's lives are on the line." The experience had changed all of them. Sarah had found a new career path that gave her life deeper meaning. Tommy had developed a fascination with medicine and emergency services that his teachers said might well lead him to a career in healthcare. And Frank had been reminded that his years of service and expertise still mattered, that his decision to always be prepared to help had literally saved a life. Word of Frank's roadside surgery had spread throughout the county, adding to his already legendary status among local emergency responders. But Frank remained humble about his role in Tommy's survival, always insisting that he had simply done what needed to be done. The local newspaper had wanted to write a feature story about the dramatic rescue, but Frank had declined the publicity. "I didn't do it for recognition," he told the reporter. "I did it because that's what you do when someone needs help." That philosophy, simple, direct, and selfless, had guided Frank's entire adult life. Whether as a paramedic racing to accident scenes or as a rancher helping stranded motorists, he had always believed that we are all responsible for taking care of each other. As Sarah watched Tommy chase the dog around the yard, she reflected on how a single moment of crisis had brought together 3 lives in unexpected ways. Tommy would grow up knowing that there were people in the world who would stop everything to help a stranger. Sarah had discovered strength she never knew she possessed, and a calling she never expected to find. And Frank had been reminded that retirement from formal service doesn't mean retirement from service itself. That knowledge, compassion, and preparedness are gifts that should never be hoarded but shared whenever the opportunity arises. The old rancher might have hung up his paramedic uniform years ago, but he had never stopped being the kind of person who would plead, move faster when time was running out, who would approach any emergency with competence and courage, and who would always do what no one expected, except perhaps the people whose lives he touched. Sometimes the most extraordinary heroes are hiding in plain sight, waiting for the moment when their skills and compassion are needed most. And sometimes, all it takes is the courage to stop and help when stopping might make all the difference in the world.